It all started roughly 2 weeks ago. One day I had come home from work utterly exhausted. The double shifts I had been pulling the previous month were beginning to take their toll both on my body as well as my mind. When I walked through the door to my house, I wanted nothing more than to just crawl into bed and drift off into blissful slumber. I shrugged off my jacket and tossed my bag on the floor. A moment later, I fell comically onto my bed and fell asleep. I was awoken sometime later in the middle of the night by the sound of scratching. At first, I wasn't sure if I was simply dreaming it or not, but as the sluggishness faded and my senses became sharper, I realized that wasn't the case. I laid in my bed too tired to move, yet unable to sleep due to this incessant scratching. It had to have been a rodent, I thought, possibly in my attic or under my crawl space. The subtle yet consistent scratching seemed to bore its way into my head. I tried to drown out the noise with a pillow, but that proved ineffective. I laid there trying to discern specifically where the sound was coming from, but after a few minutes, the sound stopped. Still wondering what exactly was causing that sound, that concern steadily dissipated as sleep once again took me. The next morning when I woke up, I wondered if the sounds I had heard was just some bizarre dream brought on by my overworked stress. I quickly pushed it out of my mind as I got ready for another long day at work. The day progressed normally, and I once again found myself trudging through my front door. I slowly got ready for bed and laid down not long after. This time, however, the scratching sound arose much earlier than the other night. I was only on the cusp of drifting off when it began to reverberate around me. I sat up in bed, rubbing my eyes in the process. I waited and listened for a moment. The scratching sounded like it was coming from one of my walls. I got out of bed and tried my best to follow the sound. I paced around my room listening intently. As I approached one of the walls, the sound stopped completely. It had to be mice or something, I thought. I decided I'd just contact pest control in the morning and have them deal with the issue. So, the next morning before work, I contacted a local pest control company and scheduled for them to come out on my upcoming day off. The next 2 nights were more of the same. The scratching always seemed to start at around 1 a.m. Then it would last anywhere from 15 minutes to an hour before stopping. On the 3rd day, pest control arrived, and I eagerly greeted him at the door. I explained to him my problem and he assured me not to worry. He said with it getting colder out, it's not uncommon for critters to make their way into homes. He asked to see my attic as well as my crawl space, and I led him to both. I apologized in advance for their appearance, but he just brushed it off, telling me he's probably seen worse. After inspecting the attic, he told me that there was no sign of any rodents living up there. Relief washed over me when I heard this, and I led him around the house to where the crawl space entrance was. He entered, and about 15 minutes later he emerged. He said that there were some evidence of mice being there, but he didn't see any. He said he would place some traps, but that was the best he could do. I thanked him for coming out and prayed those traps would be enough to quell that scratching. The first night following the pest control visit, I was pleasantly surprised to find no scratching occurred. I slept soundly throughout the night and woke up feeling quite refreshed. That pleasantness would be short-lived, however, as the next night, the scratching returned with a vengeance. It was much louder than before. The sound of nails on wood made me cringe in my bed. I could feel my annoyance at the sound growing with each passing second, until I eventually snapped. I rose from my bed, walking over to the wall which I believed the sound was coming from, and pounded my fist against it a few times. The scratching halted almost immediately. When it did, I felt somewhat empowered by the reaction. As I was heading back to bed triumphant, a new sound echoed in my small bedroom. The sound of something hitting the other side of my wall. I could feel my throat begin to tighten as I slowly turned around to face the wall. I waited for a few moments, wondering what on earth could have made that noise. Another slam caused me to take a step back. The silence that followed each strike was deafening. I had no idea what was hitting the other side of my wall, but I could feel a growing sense of dread within me. The banging finally stopped, and I found myself sitting there without answers. I finished sleeping in the living room that night. The night that followed, the scratching returned almost as if to mock me. I laid in bed just staring at the wall, wondering what could be causing it. If it wasn't rodents, then it had to be something else. Just as my mind began to wonder at the possibilities, the scratching ceased. I exhaled a breath, as it was finally time for me to get some sleep. Then, right before my eyes began to shut, I saw something on my wall. It was moving. My eyes slowly slid back open, and I laid there in confusion. A small portion of the wall was extending outwards towards me. The wall slowly began to morph into the shape of a hand. I thought I had to be dreaming, and I continuously blinked my eyes. The hand extended outwards, forming an arm. I could feel my breath getting caught in my chest. The hand then popped and twisted itself into the wall almost as if to push its body out. A head began to form next. Watching my previously solid wall stretch and transform like rubber was horrifying. A face started to take shape. It had very minor features, like that of a mannequin. A faintly smiling face with blank indents for eyes. I couldn't stop staring at this monstrosity before me. A second arm came through, this time much faster. The sound it was making as it was passing through my wall was something I'll never forget. It sounded like that scratching I had heard previously, but on top of that, the sounds of bones breaking and dislocating. I wanted to vomit, but I somehow managed to keep it down. It pushed and pulled itself out of my wall. Once it was mostly free, it began to crawl down towards my bedroom floor. I didn't want to look at it, but at the same time I couldn't look away. Its body began to rise up to its feet slowly. Its entire body was one smooth form, with plastic-like white skin. It slowly took a step towards my bed, and as it did so, its body began to jitter and twitch. Its arms began to snap in multiple directions as it walked closer. It was as if all the bones in its body were dislocating and relocating simultaneously. I didn't know what to do. The fear I was feeling was so heavy that I didn't have the strength to lift my body. All I could do was lie there and stare at this oncoming nightmare. The smile upon its featureless face seemed to grow wider as the distance between us grew shorter. It raised a smooth white arm out towards me, the fingers popping and snapping in different directions. It reached down towards me and I was too frightened to move. Once the hand touched my arm, I watched with wide eyes as its face began to change. The smile began to diminish into an almost frown. Then, its jaw dropped nearly 1.5 feet. The entire outline of its mouth was encircled by barbed teeth. They reminded me of thorns on a rose bush. Within the mouth itself was just an empty void that seemed to go on endlessly. It began to lower its mouth towards me. It was coming within inches of my face. When it did, I felt myself come back to my senses and my fight or flight response kicked in. I wanted to run, so I yanked my arm free of its grasp. When I did, it let out a gut-wrenching screech that left a ringing in my ears. I rolled off the other side of my bed, clutching my ears tightly. I ran to the door and threw it open. I glanced back and saw this thing shambling after me. The way it was moving was unnerving. It was wholly not human or animal. It was something else entirely. I grabbed my keys off the kitchen table and darted out of my house. I hopped into my car and drove the hour drive all the way to my girlfriend's house. Although she was happy to see me, she was also equally confused at my arrival so early in the morning. I asked her if I could stay with her for a little while, and her being the sweetheart that she is, she let me stay without question. It's been about 2 days since that night. I have so many more questions than answers at this point. Like, what was it? Where did it come from? Why was it after me? If any of you have ever seen anything like this before, please let me know. I'm beginning to feel like my overworked mind might have actually snapped. If any of you out there hear a faint scratching noise coming from one of your bedroom walls, get out of there. Don't go to sleep. Don't ignore it. Just get out before whatever that thing was gets you first.